Oh,
All right. And then this one, I think. There we go.
okay, so I just want to say I'm Judy with Centurion Roman Shade, and welcome to Widget World Wednesday. This is Wednesday, May 6th, 2026, and we are so glad you all are here. Um, I'm just trying to see if I can make this bigger. I guess I'll just run with it. Okay, so today is one of our education episodes or sessions, and I'm hoping that people have been able to look at the published series that we put out for Hobbled Shades, Making a Hobbled Shade. It's a 15-part series, and it also corresponds with the handouts that we have in a PDF form on our website. So you can follow the instructions in text. This is pretty much just text version of what the slides are. And if you get to a step, the idea is that you can go to the YouTube and go right to that step in a video series, and you'll have a visual reference for what we're talking about in the handouts. So if you're a visual learner, you can just follow along with the video series, but sometimes you don't always want to be looking at a screen when you're trying to make a shade. So that's why you'll always have a printed PDF handout to go along with it. So full disclosure, I will say that I've been a workroom for over 30 years, and one of the first Roman shade jobs I was ever asked to do was a hobbled shade. And the client came to me and wanted it made just like Pottery Barn sold on their catalog or in their website. So, I kind of looked at it, and the windows were quite large. They just wanted a tan cotton twill fabric, very, that's exactly what Pottery Barn was selling at the time. Chris, do you want to mute participants? Um,
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. So, I made it, and I was so new to the business. I really didn't know where to find all this information. I did find it. I was telling Chris I used to go to the library and pull books. That's what we did. This was days before social media, days before the forums or any of that. So I I pulled books. I got my instructions from the library. I made these hobbled shades. They were kind of big, kind of cumbersome, and I said to myself, never again. So
Mhm.
that's kind of where the journey with my hobbled shades ended. And if a client actually came to me and said, I really like a hobbled shade, I would do everything to sort of talk them out of them because I knew the extra work involved, I knew the extra fabric. And personally, I just didn't like making them. So fast forward about 30 years, and I we have the widget now, and I actually always liked the look of a hobbled shade, I must say. There are certain fabrics that, I just think when they're down, they they look nice. When they're up, they look nice. They will give you an extra deeper stack, so you have to keep that in mind. But after the new child, I sort of discounted them when all the child safety regulations started coming on around 10 years ago. I kind of discounted them because there were a lot of reasons that the traditional method of fabrication was not going to work because the minimum, or sorry, the maximum circumference space you needed between the fabric and the lift cord, once you add that hobble, it was really hard to maintain that sort of diameter maximum and still have a shade that was going to look right. And the last thing I wanted to do was add a bunch more hobbles to a shade that was already, kind of a pain to make. So, um, so I was thinking about this because I thought, we don't see very many hobbled shades, but they are, I think, still a really pretty shade. So I thought about it and thought about it and came up with this fabrication. And now I must say that I've actually made probably more hobbled shades in the last few months than I have made flat shades. So I'm hoping that you try them and let me know what you think. So this is where you can find all the instructions, and I'm going to just kind of quickly walk through all the fabrication steps. So if you haven't watched the series, maybe this will get you a little bit more interested in giving it a try. I do always recommend that you try a hand sample first and see how you like it. The hand sample size, I mean, it's a little bit larger than a hand sample because it ends up being 36 by 45, but it's still a working size sample that you could easily take to a client's house. You can hold it in your hand to operate it so it doesn't have to be mounted on a stand like you see behind me. But both of these shades behind me are that 36 by 45 inch length. So, so there's the series, and first, the first step that I walk everyone through. This is the number one question we get every week. We still get it. Is how many lift cords do I need for my shade? So for a hobbled shade, you can order the 2, 3, or 4 cord kits. We generally recommend, like we say, that the lift cords be every 10 inches for a basic flat Roman shade, and you should test your fabrics to see how many lift cords you need. And if you add ribs, you can go further between the lift cords. And we generally say that the fabric weight is irrelevant, but the rigidity of the fabric and the look, either you want it straight or relaxed, of the shade design, they both have a bearing on the number of cords. And what I say with this hobbled shade is that we do add some structure because we use an iron-on buckram um, in part of the fabrication. So one of the steps uses an iron-on buckram, sort of in place of ribs. You could use ribs if you wanted, but I did it with buckram and kind of like how that goes. I don't think the ribs would have the same effect as the buckram does, and you'll maybe see why. But go ahead if you want to try it with ribs instead of the iron-on buckram. Go ahead and try it and let me know what you think. But so the hobbled shade does have some structure, so you could probably go wider than the 10-inch spacing. So let me just get that off. Okay, so cutting the fabric, what is vastly different from most of all the shade fabrications that I've done is I normally, on every other shade, you start with the face fabric, cutting that out. Um, I mean, sometimes you do cut, I will say, I do cut the lining, but I don't always cut the lining first. In this hobbled shade fabrication, we're going to start by doing a lot of work on the lining fabric itself before we even cut the face fabric. So don't even worry about the face fabric at this point for these next couple steps. So we're going to start, you just kind of follow the formula, and I usually add 6 inches for my side hems, which would give me 3 inches on either side, and that gives a 1.5 inch um, double turn. And it's going to be the finished width. So you're going to have to just kind of follow the formula here. It's the finished width plus 6 inches for the side hems. And then I'm going to minus 1 inch from the actual face fabric. And that's the actual width. And that's because the lining on this hobbled shade is actually going to be sort of independent of the back. When you fabricate it, you'll see. And it's going to be inset a 1/2 inch from the actual finished width of your shade. So that's where that 1 inch comes in. And then on the cut length, it's going to be the exact length plus 8 inches, which is our 4 inch double hem. What I don't say here, I don't want to confuse people too much, but since we're just talking, I'll say this once, and you may forget it or not, but if you trust the formula. So what ends up happening is I always have about 2 inches of my lining that comes up on my board. And in this case, this lining is actually going to be set. It's a half an inch in on either side, and it's actually going to be 2 inches set under the finished length. So I only had to add the 8 inches. And you'll see as we fabricate how the lining itself sort of shifts up 2 inches, and that gives me the amount that I need to wrap the board. Okay, next step. So this is just pressing and turning. I'm not going to read through all this because I basically told you it's just I press my side hems in and then I turn up the bottom. So on most of my shades, if I'm not doing a concealed grip, then I do a 4-inch double hem. You could also do a 2-inch double if you wanted. You just have to know that you're going to be your grip, because the grip is going to be on this lining section. It's going to be 4 inches up under the finished length of your shade. You could do that. I often find that a 2-inch stiff hem is actually better at sort of transferring all the weight vertically up the cords evenly. A little bit better than a 4-inch, but I started with a 4-inch, and at some point I may sort of shift to the two. But I would say start with the basics, and then you can modify to your preferences, knowing what works at the beginning. Um, so at this point, we're going to finish off the bottom hem. We're going to put the Skirtex in it. And in this shade, the hobbled shade, I'm only going to be stitching up the sides of that double 4-inch hem and across the top. I'm going to put the weight bar in. It's all the same fabrication as our flat Roman. And I whip stitch it close. I'm not stitching the side hems. And at any point in this construction, I never end up stitching down those side hems. So what I would say with the hobbled shade is definitely do up a sample, because you have to kind of break some habits if you're used to just whip stitching those side hems. Um, you may end up having to take some stitching out if you get ahead of the steps. So just follow the steps. So here is installing this is continued. So like I said, the clear hem grip, the steel weight bar goes in. You can cover your steel weight bar with white duct tape. And then I just go ahead and put that hem grip right on it when it's in place. And this is still just our lining piece. So this next step is going to save you some time, and it's actually a fabrication technique that you might want to adopt for some of your other shades, and especially if you make a lot of shades that are very similar. I'm basically taking a piece of this is a non-iron-on piece of buckram that I'm going to use as a marking template. And what I do is it's cut to the finished length of the shade from top to bottom. And I'm going to mark on it 2 inches up, and then I'm going to mark on it again 4 inches up with a dotted line. And then from that, I'm just talking you through, this is where the math gets involved. So from that dash line to the top of my finished shade, I actually subtract, sometimes I do it, sometimes I don't. I might subtract 2 inches from the top. And then I'm going to divide that space between the dotted line and the top of my shade, maybe minus 2 inches for where the board and the widget sit, take up space. Then I'm going to divide that whole area by a number, by a whole number that gives me an answer that's less than 8 inches. And that's going to tell me where my tack points need to be. So, it has to be 8 inches or less. If it's 6, you're going to have a bunch. I think in this sample shade, it ended up being 7.75 is what I used. And that's a lot of times that's kind of what I'll use anywhere between 7.5 and 8. I sort of will round up or round down so that I get, I don't work with fraction, like really tiny fractions. I'll work with quarters. So half inch, a quarter of an inch, a half inch, 3/4 of an inch, or a whole inch.
Judy, can I interject as an engineer? When you
Yeah.
say divide by an even number, do you really mean divide by a whole number?
Yes, I do. I mean, divide by a whole number. Yes, a whole number, not a fraction. So you can have a fraction as your answer as long as it's less than 8 inches. But yes, you're dividing by a whole number. Thank you. Yes, not an even number. Um, Okay, so does that all make sense? I mean, this is where you might want to go to step 4 in the video. If you're following along just with the PDF, you might be like, wait a minute, go check out the YouTube video because I sort of talk you through it and I show you on this template exactly what I'm marking and what everything kind of means. Okay, so move ahead. So, um, was that also step? Okay. Was that step 4 or step 5
That was
for doing?
four. I skipped ahead two and I'm back to five.
Okay. So this next one, let's see, cut to, okay. So we've got our template done. Um, this photo doesn't really work with this, what I'm talking about here, but I am going to be cutting strips, iron-on buckram strips that are half an inch narrower than the finished lining. And Um, I think let me look at my notes because I'm thinking that something is slightly off here. Okay, so in step 4, which I didn't mention, is that you're going to use that template and you're going to put the solid line that is just below the 4. That's actually the bottom of your lining, and that dash line represents the whip stitch that you did for the top of your lining. So when you put this this buckram on your lining, you're going to mark where all the tack points are, and then you'll see where you've got 2 extra inches of lining because you're going to mark at the very top as well. And then for every place where you've marked a tack point, you're going to put on a piece of iron-on buckram, cut about a half an inch less narrower than the width of your shade. And I think, okay, in the video, I don't know if you have another slide for this, but we're going to put the buckram down just below those dash marks where the tack points are at every tack point. So you're basically going to be reinforcing on the wrong side of the lining. You press and secure the iron-on buckram below each set of tack points, moving up the shade with the last piece of buckram is going to be placed along the top where the shade mounts to the board, and that will fall 2 inches beyond your cut or 2 inches below your cut length of your lining. And you'll see that's because we shifted it all up 2 inches at this point. Okay, so like I said, if this doesn't make sense right now, then go back to the videos when you're doing it, because I think it'll make sense at that point. So we've basically done a lot of construction on the lining itself, and now we're going to cut the face fabric. So once you've done all that to your lining, you'll know exactly how many hobbled sections you're going to have on your shade. So if you didn't do it in sort of the pre-planning stage, because sometimes we get lazy and we don't do that. You can look at your lining and you have a visual of exactly where your hobbles are going to be on your shade because you've basically just kind of done like a skeleton frame of your basic shade. So you're going to consider the print and pattern for the placement. If you have a printed pattern, you just know that the hobbles are going to obstruct your pattern. And as you can see in this one, it's a fairly large print. I don't find it overly disconcerting that the pattern gets interrupted with the hobbles. Um, with a good pattern placement, it probably doesn't matter so much. It just makes it kind of a more interesting shade. But keep it in mind when you are doing it that you're going to lose fabric to the underside of the hobble. I will say if you're short on fabric, you could actually piece fabric and just you'll be able to see exactly where you could piece fabric in your shade and get some extra length if you needed to. So, it might be a good style solution for a client that has, you need to get a shade and you have to use fabric and you don't have continuous pieces. Obviously charge for the extra, but this is a shade where you could piece in under those folds and you'll never see a seam line in there. So what I would say when you're doing the cut fabric is just follow the formula. So we've got it here written out, and I go over it in the video as well. Every hobbled section in this case, and I talk about, if you have 6-inch spacing, then you're going to have 9 inches of fabric in your hobble. This with a 7.75 is basically 8-inch spacing between my tack points. So I allow 12 inches of fabric in my hobble. So that's the ratio that I use for my hobbles is I add about, what was that, 30%, I guess, onto it. So 8 to 12 inches of fabric and 6 would be 9, and then anything in between. So if you have 7 inches in between your tack points, you probably only want 10 inches of fabric in your hobble. So this is where you can use the formula and adjust. And again, this is the math section. So go to the video if you're plugging this along. And you can see then that, and I talk about it, that when I calculate rough calculation at the beginning, I factor twice as much fabric in the length as I would as if this were a flat shade. For that reason, you've got hobbles, you've got extra folds here and there. Um, so it ends up, if for a rough calculation, if it's a print fabric, just do 2 times the width when you're estimating. But definitely when you go to cut it out, you're going to go through the formula and you're going to figure out, knowing what your tack point spacing is will help you. At worst case, you can go by 12 inches per hobble and you'll still be good there. So again, this is the math portion. And if you follow the formula, trust it. I think you'll be fine. So now we're going to be pressing the hems for the face fabric. And I do this, press the side hems, and then I'm going to press up the bottom. So here, the bottom hem, 8 inches up. So it's deeper. Let's see, 8 inches, or is it 4 inches? No, it is deeper. So on this hobbled shade, because the fabric comes down in a hobble, and I want a little bit of the shade visible on the bottom, I went with a 6-inch, let's call it a bottom hem,
Finished him.
finished hem. Is that what I call it?
Third
So
bolt.
So when you order, if you're ordering a widget kit from us and you say you want a hobbled, you're doing a hobbled shade, we can give you an extra wide piece of Skirtex for that bottom because you're going to need in here I have a 6-inch piece. So we got skirt tacks in 8-inch widths, and we can send you an extra 8-inch, but we need to know the width of your shade. So you need to probably put in the comment box that you're making a hobbled shade, and also maybe send us an email because we haven't started including extra Skirtex because we're just kind of putting this out there that will offer you an extra piece of Skirtex for this style because the 4-inch piece you're going to use in the lining. And I think it's still good to have a piece of stiffener in in the front here. Now, I will say it's not critical because at no point in raising and lowering this hobbled shade are you ever pushing or pulling from the actual face fabric hem. So you could just put a rib in there. You probably could just put a piece of regular 4-inch buckram in there. I just find buckram sometimes is not always stiff enough. Um, so I put Skirtex in because that's what I had. And if you want some, like I said, I mean, we're not going to ship it out separately, but if you let us know ahead of time and even send us an email and say, heads up, I'm making hobbled shades. Can you make sure that you send in an extra 8-inch by whatever width piece of Skirtex? There's a better chance that that will get in with your order when it ships if you give us, or send a text or do something. Um, so here we're let me just look through. Okay, so you're gonna finish out the bottom, and again, we are not stitching up the sides. On this hobbled shade fabrication, I do not stitch the side hems at all. But you see me stitching the side of the hem section where the Skirtex is, and I whip stitch across the top. And then I'm also going to take that template and I'm going to mark, actually, I'm not going to use the template. I'm going to mark on this piece, going up from the hem, I'm going to mark 12 inches where each lift cord is going to be. Because the 12 inches is what I need, that's going to be the reference point that I need when I attach the lining, which you'll see in the next step. So at this point, you are just marking this. If you used 7-inch spacing, you're going to be marking at 10-inch intervals. So that number will need to change to correspond with your the actual amount of fabric that you want in your hobble. Okay. So in this video, I added decorative banding or trim, and this is a technique that you could use if you were doing a flat Roman shade or a hobbled. So I figured I would sort of sneak it in to this hobbled shade because I actually really like the look of sort of a racing stripe on a solid fabric in a hobbled shade. I think it all kind of goes together nicely. And so I'm just kind of giving you one more technique. Obviously, you don't have to do it. I don't know that I would recommend for a hobbled shade. I don't think I would recommend trim on the lower bottom hem for a couple different reasons. I find that the hobbled shades, there's just a lot going on with the loop of the fabric. I don't know that you need interest down at that bottom hem because usually you're going to so much effort to get these nice soft folds that I think whatever you do should accentuate and highlight the nice soft folds you have. So running vertical banding either down the outside edges, this I happen to inset, and I sort of talk you through my design process because I was kind of doing it on the fly a little bit as I was making this shade. I worked with a stripe fabric. So I made my banding out of fabric. It was a striped fabric, and it also happened to be an irregular stripe, which meant when I went to lay out the stripe, I had to invert one of the stripe patterns so that they would mirror each other side to side. If you're working with a regular stripe, it's not going to matter, but I try and I try and put in a few extra tips that things you need to think about or things to consider when you're doing all this so that you don't have to go back and redo it. So that's it's totally optional to add a trim. So here is a nice close-up of when the lining and the face fabrics are combined. Now you can see the bottom of the shade, the 2-inch inset, and I wrote down on my pattern, I tell you, bottom of lining in that solid line, the 4 inches up, and you can see where the whip stitch matches that dash line, which ends up being where our brass rings are stitched, and that's where our tack points and the ladder tape begins on the shade. So on the wrong side, you're going to line it all up together that way. And your template, in case you start to freak out. So, remember we've gone 6 inches up, and this is why I've done 6 inches up on the face fabric. So now you can see that, um, you know, it it's better, I thought, to have all of those that lining and everything matching up in the same point on the shade. If you were to adjust and just do 2 inches for that lining, um, then you're going to have a hobble that may overshoot the actual bottom hem of your shade. And that's why I've gone up 6 inches in this whole process. So that when that first hobble comes down, because remember now, I've got the basically 8-inch spacing, and I've got 12 inches of fabric in there. So when that all compresses, I have about a 6-inch hobble. So that's why I have a 6-inch hem. So hopefully that all kind of makes sense. Like I said, do a sample and you'll kind of see how all the math lines up. If it's not crystal clear right now, which it may not. Okay. So now this is where I think the magic sort of happens. Everything is lined up and you're going to start sewing the tack points and the brass rings and the ladder tape all in this step. And you're going to start at the very bottom where you've whip stitched everything together. And one by one, you're going to be working row by row, moving up the shade. So you're gonna, I'm left-handed, so I tend to start on the right side, do my first tack. You might start on the left side if you're right-handed. Anyway you start, you're gonna start with the in this case, 3 brass rings with the ladder tape. They all get tacked through all 3 layers right where all of your hems are starting. So once you've done that, now you've got your tack points are marked on the lining, and you've got tack points marked on the face fabric as you see it. And what I ended up doing is I use pins, and this is again, go to the video in this step. I'll use pins to align the lining and the face fabric, because what ends up happening, you're going to move up vertically in rows. Don't do one whole lift row because you're going to run into fighting some fabric if you do that. So do row by row horizontally, not vertically, when you're doing your tack points. So this is a little bit different than what you might do if it's flat. Because what you're going to end up doing is you've got 8 inches of fabric on your lining, but you've got 12 inches of face fabric. So you have to kind of jog the lining up as you go. And this is where I use pins, and I'll pin through the lining, and because it's a pinnable table, I'll pin right through where I want where the face fabric marks are going to line up. And you can see if, doing the center one is better. I generally start at the outsides and work across. But every time you go, you're going to be moving up the lining to align with the tack points on the face fabric. And that's going to create your hobble as you go.
Judy, question. You
Yeah.
will be tacking through all fabric layers at the top of the iron-on buckram strip, through the buckram strip or above it?
If you've placed your buckram strip just below where your dashes are, you can catch it. Um, you can catch it on one thread. You could do it right above if you want as well. It really doesn't matter, but that is exactly where you're going to be tacking is so you can feel it, and I talk about that. You can feel it. Your line, the buckram is actually now on the underside of this lining. Um, so you don't see it, but you can feel it. And I used a buckram that was non-woven, but iron-on. And so it was kind of thin. It was that papery kind of buckram. So I could kind of feel it, but and you can definitely see it if you kind of peel it back. So yes, it's gonna your buckram ends up being below those tack points. So that's also another good checkpoint to verify that you are tacking in the correct place. Um, because I think what I neglected to say in this video, but I do say it in the steps, is that you end up marking the tack points on the lining on both sides. You do it once where you're going to be putting your buckram, and I don't necessarily mark it on when I'm putting the buckram, going back a few steps. When I'm doing the buckram, I just kind of do a dash line going across so I can line that buckram up, but I flip it over when I've got it all, the buckram all done. I go back and I press it from the front, and then I'm marking the actual tack point locations from the front of this lining. So you do end up having reference points um, as well. But yes, it should line up at the top of your buckram. Uh, and then, what I do, a lot of times I will put a small dot of glue on the tack points, let it dry. For blackout shades, sometimes I will put quick dry correction glue, fabric, or sorry, quick dry correction fluid down on the pinholes. What I've also experimented doing is painting that correction fluid on the tack point and then going immediately over it with some glue to kind of make my own opaque glue, if you will. And I found success doing that because sometimes the correction fluid over time that'll just flake off. But I've been experimenting and I kind of like just doing it all sort of in a similar step when everything is wet and I feel like, now I've got an opaque glue. Um, and okay, so I think we can move on. Okay, so from the front, now you can kind of see that excess fabric and what those hobbles, what the hobbles end up looking like. So when you're doing the tacks from the back side, it's not going to all lay out flat. You really just want to make sure that all your reference points line up. You want your ladder tape relatively straight and flat. Don't pull it tight. You can always the ladder tape can be somewhat slack because the cord is always going to ensure that there isn't excess ladder tape in there. The cord it'll just ruffle around the cord. So in this step here, what I'm doing is I'm actually going to tack on the edges the lining fabric, which is a 1/2 inch inset, to the face fabric, just going through the side hems. You're not tacking, so you never see any stitching to the front of the shade. And I'm tacking it at the bottom of where that buckram is. Because what I want when the shade folds up and collapses, I want the buckram to sort of stay married to the face fabric for the 4 inches of that top section. because I was afraid if I don't, and you can experiment with this, maybe you don't need to do that. Maybe you just kind of want to glue it down. Don't know. I do tacks because I know when I do a tack, if I don't like it, I can snip it out and redo it. Once you do glue, it's just a little bit messier. But I wanted to make sure that when this folds up, that that the lining with the buckram section folds to the inside of the hobble and doesn't billow out to the back. Because if it billows out to the back, it's not going to be so good. Um, and and I it hasn't happened to me, but it's just kind of an insurance that it doesn't. What when I made the printed shade that is in the stand that you see there, I didn't do the tack points at this stage when it was flat on the table. I ended up doing it afterwards because as I was working it, I was starting to see that the buckram didn't always want to go to fold to the inside and stay sort of married to the face fabric. So I did the tack points when the shade was finished and it was in the stand. I On this blue shade, I'm showing you where you can do it in the steps, but in the video, I will say that you can either do it in the steps or you can do it after when you've pulled the pin and you've got the shade hanging. I will say that I on the blue one, I didn't have to adjust any of the tack points after I did it like this, but there's a shade that I did afterwards that I ended up, once I hung it, I ended up readjusting all those tack points when I let gravity sort of hold things down. I found that I had sort of a buckle across sort of the horizontal of each sort of soft fold. And when I released the tack points, I just readjusted so that I got it nice and taut across and down. So that section where the buckram was, it's maybe easier to do it when the shade is standing. So just keep that in mind. I talk about it in the video that you can do it. But this is where like I would not glue those tack points at all. There's really no need to. But I would do the tack points and know that, that's something that you might want to adjust later, or it's something you might want to omit at this step when it's flat on the table. You might want to just skip it, but then go back to it. Remember to go back to it after you've pulled the pin and you think it's complete, and you'll have to go back at that point. So, and that now just putting it on the shade, this is the same thing. I always, same method that I use for a flat Roman shade. I always try and add about 6 inches. I'm using a 1x2, which finishes out at 1.5 inches. And I like to just add 6 inches of the face fabric so that I can just completely wrap the board. I'm wrapping the ends in a little square of matching face fabric, just because the ends sometimes do show. Um, so I do that first, and then this is the 6 inches where it extends, and I'm stapling it across the top, and then I'm going to flip the board towards myself and completely around, and I'm going to end up stapling so that all of this fabric completely covers that board. So if you don't do that and you want to use lining, you can do that as well. Just, do it the way you normally would do it using lining fabric. Here you can see where it's that extra 6 inches completely wraps around. And it's actually that little narrow side that ends up turning to face the lining is where a second set of staples are, for the raw edge. The raw edge is sort of turned under and it's all stapled. So at this point, I'm installing the screw eyes where every lift cord comes up and meets the board, you're going to put in a screw eye, which comes in your kit. You can use an awl to sort of start that. I usually, as just a standard practice, I usually put the screw eye in the middle of the board. I'm going to want the screw eyes to align with where the cords come out of the widget. So we generally recommend that you center the widget on the board. It doesn't have to be in the middle of the board, because when you have three cords, it's going to have to be either left or right of center. It could be either left or right of center. You just want to make sure that the pin is going to be up when you get there. Well, I'm kind of skipping ahead. Um, but so this is screw eyes. Just, make sure your screw eyes are sort of level with where your widget cords are going to come out. If you're using a wider board and you're going to put the widget, forward or back of the mounting board, if you're doing outside mount and for some reason you've got a wider board than the 1x2, just I just think it's a good practice to make sure that the screw eyes are in line with where the cords come out. Anytime that you have an angle to your cords, you're going to be adding more resistance onto them, which is going to be a little more friction, which means they may not go up as smoothly as they could. So at this point, you're installing the widget, and here you can see you have to sort of pick, because on a 3 cord, 2 cords come out one side, 1 cord comes out the other, and in dead center of your shade, you've got a screw eye. So it doesn't really matter which side it goes on. You can flip it around as long as the stickers are up and the pin is up and exposed. You don't want to do it, flip it around the other way, and you'll never be able to pull the pin. It's kind of obvious, but I guess worth mentioning. Okay, so you don't want to over tighten your screws as well when you're mounting. So once you have your widget installed, you're just going to simply thread down through each screw eye. I get asked this when you've got a 3 cord. I do take both of those cords through the center screw eye, and then 1 cord is going to go out to the end. Again, I do not think it matters at all which cord goes to the outside and which cord goes to the center. They both come out centered of the widget, so they can both go through that screw eye, and then just split off, one or the other. I sort of look at it, I don't like cords that overlap, so make sure that nothing is overlapping. I don't know that you could have those 2 cords overlap in that screw eye, but it might be possible for that you to inadvertently crisscross or twist up so that they cross. So you don't want anything crossing. You want a clear path for every cord going up into the spool. And I just simply weave the cord. We give you a little plastic needle, and I just weave in and out of the ladder tape. I start about 3 inches, 3 solid sections above the first tack point. So when it comes out of the widget, I don't thread it right away. Even though you see the ladder tape right at the top of the shade, I don't start weaving the cord until I get to, it's the first 3 before that first tack point. Because if you take your board and you turn it perpendicular to the way it's going to be sitting, you can see that the cord actually wants to come forward of the shade a little. You don't want your shade to be that close up at the top. Um, so like I said, just kind of it's kind of obvious when you look at it and you do it, but I'll talk about it in the video. So again, go look at the video of how I do it, and you'll see an example of me threading 3 different lift cords the exact same way. When I get down to the bottom, um, then I just tie off to the brass ring with a double hitch knot. We have tutorials on our website about how to do that. You can look up on YouTube Um, good knots for tying. And I will cut the I will cut and I will leave about 8 inches here at the bottom. And so it says to tuck in that 8 inches into the bottom hem between the whip stitches of the bottom hem. That is sort of standard. That's why I hand whip stitch across my bottom hem, is so that I can easily conceal that 8 inches. I've never needed that extra cord, but if for some reason you needed to tie it or retie it or take the widget off or whatever, it's easier to have about 8 inches of, or 6 inches or 8 inches of cord, whatever you want, than to have a short little stubby piece of cord when you're trying to, especially when you're trying to do another hitch knot at the bottom. So what ends up happening, because our whip stitch in this case is actually on the underside of this lining, because remember we've done all our stitching and we've flipped it back over. So what you're seeing on top here is side hems are all turned in towards each other. There are the lining fabric is flat and clean on this side that you're looking at, all the way down. You do see a little bit of thread marks where I've whip stitched across the top of the lining, and what I do with that plastic needle is I just poke through the entire lining fabric so that I now am on, you can flip that sort of 4 inch hem, stiff hem up forward, and now you can see the underside where all the whip stitching is, and then I just bury that 8 inches on that underside of the lining. So you never see it. The cord just kind of comes down, it knots, it sort of goes back in to the lining, and you never see sort of a rough cut cord there. It's just kind of a nice clean look. You can go back when you're happy with your shade and everything. I would go back and put a glue dot on that hitch knot. Um, but if it's a proper hitch knot, you won't have any slippage of that at all. We've said it before, and I'll say it here. We don't recommend orbs at all in any of these cases with the widget, any shades that you make. The orbs at the bottom will fail, and a lot of people will say that they'll put them in and then they'll go back and they'll knot off afterwards. Sometimes the orb fails, and we've had people sort of lose their cord through. Yeah, or they use other kinds of products that come with something like an orb at the bottom that also don't work, because once you pull the pin on the widget, there's a lot of pressure. The cords are under tension, and there's a lot of pressure for it to retract back. That's what keeps your shade down. That's what helps maintain the movement of it, is to have those cords always under pressure so that it doesn't really require a whole lot of pushing or pulling on your part. But for that reason, we discontinued including the orbs, and we'll just keep repeating that we don't recommend them at all. So we strongly suggest you just do your hitch knot, leave that extra 6 or 8 inches as a little insurance for you, a little peace of mind. But I've made my shades like this, and I've never had a problem. So, okay, and pulling the pin. So now you're there. You can pull the pin, verify that you've knotted everything off at the bottom. I do have a little video that I posted about how to do the widget wiggle, because this is pulling the pin is the widget wiggle, essentially. When this retracts, you want to make sure, you don't want to do it super fast, because you want to make sure that you're watching that that buckram doesn't buckle to the incorrect side. So this is where it needs to be falling to the inside. So if for some reason you didn't do the tack points to tack it to the face fabric, you want to do it slow enough so that you can see that the buckram is all, one on top of another, and you're not getting anything to buckle. Because I think, the problem with some of that non-woven buckrams, product is that once you get a crease or a buckle in there, it's kind of hard to get those out. And you wouldn't want to have to replace it for some reason if you got a weird crease in it. So just go slow to make sure that everything is sort of folding up as it should. Um, I, I have a little case that I have where I save all the pins, and just in case I need to put it back in. Um, okay. So, oh, can you just go back one more slide?
You said da 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 da, so I
I
assume
know,
you.
because I'm reading. That's me reading. It's a sound effect for me reading. So, what I will say about a hobbled shade is I do not recommend pressing. Um, well, I don't recommend pressing. I have steamed shades, but I will be very diligent about where I'm steaming because what you don't want, you can kind of see it in that print one. That one it wasn't pressed because you want to sort of maintain that whole section, the lower section of each hobble. You don't really want a crease mark in any of that fabric. You want it to be able to it's going to be moving and adjusting as the shade is raised and lowered. So you kind of see that crease mark in there. There's no buckram or anything there. It's just this was a sample, and what we do with our samples is we close them all up and then we stack all our shades on top of each other. So that's why you see a crease mark in there. And I've also got strong lights coming down from above, so which you wouldn't have in a room. But I do not really recommend pressing any of these folds. And I will say, I'd say this in the video at the end. Um, excuse me. The shade that I made, the blue shade, well, the printed shade is a linen uh, blend. The blue shade is actually a Sunbrella that's kind of like that Oxford cloth Sunbrella fabric, if anyone knows which one I'm talking about. It's really nice, soft, easy to work with, but those are all synthetic fibers because it's some Sunbrella. And I will say, it's behind me right now. If you are using a synthetic fabric in a hobbled shade, I think that's actually the best fabrics to use. So if, your designer is giving you some weird synthetic fabric wanting a Roman shade, and maybe they haven't considered a hobbled shade, but you know that it's going to be a devil to train if it's flat because it's synthetic, then you should probably keep in mind that a hobbled shade may be your best friend for that synthetic fabric because you're not going to get those crease marks in there. You're going to have that, they're going to sort of maintain a nice soft fold because it's a synthetic fabric. And that is, I think, is just something, another plus for a hobbled shade. If you've been hesitant about doing it, um, keep it in mind that synthetic fabrics and a hobbled shade may be the perfect combination for you. Okay, so next, we can move to the next slide.
Da 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 da.
Dot, dot, dot. So I don't know if I'm on screen or not, but we'll after we'll close out of this PowerPoint and you'll see me. So I have a shade that I've posted recently, and I've collaborated with Adaptive Textiles, Janelle Deck with Adaptive Textiles, and we worked with Palm Stripe. So Palm Stripe is a pattern that they have that they carry. They are a two to the trade only digital on-demand printing service for workrooms, and they have this design that I think is open source for workrooms, and you can order this. The palm stripe, I had her run it so that knowing that 12 inches is sort of a nice, perfect size for a hobble, I wanted to get a shade that would have sort of an ombre effect and work with that 12-inch hobble. So she took palm stripe and she stretched it because it is not in a 12-inch repeat. So she stretched it for me to print it in a 12-inch repeat so that we could work with a design that would basically highlight the hobbled shade.
She
Uh,
stretched it digitally,
she
right?
did, yes, she had it printed. She stretched it digitally and had it printed so that the repeat came out to 12 inches. Um, so shout out for that. You can get that palm stripe, but if you order just the regular palm stripe, you're going to be surprised because it's not going to come out. You can see behind me, if you everyone sees. So this white shade here, this is palm stripe, and it's stretched to a 12-inch repeat. And you can see how I've lined it up so that I wanted to accentuate the look of the hobble. So when it comes up, you basically just see the dark color. Probably doesn't show up too well, but you just see the dark color of the pattern, the white on top, but you could certainly reverse it as well. You could reverse it so that it's dark up here and light on the bottom of your hobble. It's going to look like a completely different shade. But it comes in those colors that are shown. I don't know, she might do a custom color for you. I'm not 100% sure on that. But you need to open up an account with Adaptive Textiles. I've got one other colorway. I've got this in blue that I'm also going to try, and I may try it the reverse so that I've got dark up under the fold and light at the bottom, so we can see a side by side of how those look. You can see that. And then here's the sample.
Oops, sorry.
Oh, yeah, there we go. Back to, there we go. There I am. So this is the sample that I did for the class. And you can see it goes up and it goes down. And I can show you here. You can see maybe there. This is where the grip is. This is where the mounting, sorry, the weight board, the weight bar is under here in the lining. This is the 6 inches. That's the 6 inches here that I was talking about. Um, But yeah, so hopefully it's not that scary. And I would love for people to try the hobbled shade, see what you think. I'm actually, like I said, I've made more of these hobbled shades in the last 2, 3 months than I have in my entire career. Um, and I'm gonna go back to it because I actually love the look, and I'm hoping to work with Janelle a little bit more about doing some designs that actually play off the structure of this hobbled shade because I think it's um it's a way to sort of combine digital textiles with a structure, and come up with something that honestly is not on the market anywhere else, that I know of. So, you can obviously get hobbled shades. Any commercial workroom is going to be putting them out in generally solid fabrics too. I mean, you're probably not even going to get something that is as designery artistic as just using this palm stripe. So it's kind of exciting, for me to think that, we can actually do things with hobbled shades and with Roman shades that the commercial people can't do. It's sort of, this is our niche for custom as far as I'm concerned. And this is where I think workrooms need to be, making sure that designers know that if they want something as custom as this, and honestly, this is basically stock fabric, to the trade only stock fabric, but you're the ones who know how to do this and know that it can be done. So, hoping to work with them on some other design ideas, and See where that goes. And I'd love to get feedback on what you guys think of this fabrication technique. Are there any questions?
Sarah was asking, can the widget be used on a flat normal blind? And the answer, of course, is yes.
Yes, and if you go to our YouTube channel, you will see the hobbled shade series, but you're also going to see how to make a basic flat Roman shade. That was the series that we put out end of December going into January, and that's where we started, and that's where we say start with a flat Roman shade. Do the flat Roman, and then you can tackle a shade like this. A little easier, less intimidating if you start with a flat basic.
And we follow the same format. We have a PDF with step-by-step instructions, and then each step is paralleled with a corresponding video on the YouTube channel.
Correct.
So you don't have to watch the whole video just to get that one little step in the middle. And
Any?
Nancy had a good suggestion or a possible suggestion. Could you steam it but put a cardboard fabric tube in the fold to prevent a crease?
Sure, sure. Yes, and I will say on this white shade, I did steam it. I just didn't press it the same way I would a flat Roman. And usually on my flat Romans, I really press and dress those folds because I don't usually put a lot of structure into my flat Roman. So I rely on the creases to help maintain the memory of where that shade needs to go up and down. Um, but on this one, this is the one that I had tacked it when it was on my table, and I was getting sort of a weird buckle in the middle here. So I released it all and retacked it when it was hanging, and I steamed it. Um, so I'm not putting any steam down here where the hobble is. I just had to steam it in here, just to kind of get that out. And then when I was doing my tack points, I'm pushing it this way and I'm pushing it down to make sure everything is nice and tight. Not too tight, tight enough. Yes, someone asked if we ship to the UK. Yes, we do. Oh, and Chris answered. Yes, we ship to the UK quite regularly, I would say now. We've got, you will have to create your shades the way it conforms to your child safety regulations. I will say that the UK doesn't have regulations that really work with this system. What we provide is child safe and it should work with any regulations that are out there. But I know that there are certain breakaways that the UK may require that may actually not be suitable for a system like this where the cords are always under tension. Um, so check that out. I think once you do a basic shade, you'll sort of see what we were talking about, and you can make sure we ship to Canada as well. We have several workrooms in Canada that use this product quite regularly, and they know how to make the shade so it conforms to their child safety standards the same. Yep. But it is a system that has been in the market for over 10 years. So it is not brand new. It's been out there. You may have not seen it in Roman shades. So it might be new to the workrooms that create Roman shades.
Nancy was asking whether time-wise it's a lot more time than a flat Roman or to build a hobble.
I would say yes. It's got 15 steps instead of 12. So that right there is going to tell you that you've got 3 extra steps. It uses a little bit extra fabric. You are going to have to, go through the tacking is just a little bit more time consuming because you need to make sure everything lines up with each tack point moving up. So factor in, I would certainly have an upcharge to a hobbled shade. You're going to be selling more fabric. You're going to sell twice as much fabric if you do sell the fabric. So factor that. And add on, I would think of it as a surcharge. So if I have a basic flat Roman shade, I'm going to have a percentage a percentage more that a hobbled shade is going to be. Is it twice the amount of work? Probably no. Is it 30% more work? Probably yes. Um, so maybe you have a 30% surcharge onto what your flat Roman pricing is. Do that. I also highly recommend that you have documented process. So you can use our PDF as your process. I would say, again, strongly recommend you make a sample. Time yourself on that sample and see if you like it. See if you need to make a modification to it. Then you update your process using our PDF as your template. It's done and done. Then the next time you go to make a hobbled shade, if you've made some adjustments, then you've got a book. You can just go step by step by step. Every time you do it, you're going to be faster and faster, but keep your surcharge on there for the amount of time it takes you at the beginning. Because when you get faster and you get more efficient, that's your experience that also needs to be paid for, right? You getting faster, you doing more of these shades, you're not going to charge less. So even if, it takes you less time, you just need to make sure it's not taking you more time than what you anticipate. So that's sort of my little soapbox. Get a process, and I would say definitely like start with our PDFs if you don't have a process. And this way too, if you've changed something up and it doesn't come out like you expected, you know how to troubleshoot. You know how to go back and either see if something you did wasn't quite the same, or maybe you've made a modification and now your shades aren't coming out the way they used to. It gives you a way to go back and troubleshoot that without starting from scratch. Okay,
It's
so
uh it's 1:15, Judy.
yeah,
We should wrap up.
we are wrapping it up. So someone asked about the palm stripe.
I've answered all the questions.
Chris has answered them. So yeah, I don't know if the chat questions come up in the recording. So we're just going to say someone asked about purchasing palm stripe. Um, and yes. So Kathleen, yeah, you can. It is a to the trade. So I don't, as long as you get a trade account or find someone that has a trade account, yes, she will sell cut yardage. And I think that's it. Any other questions? You can unmute if you need to ask a question. You don't want to type it out. Next Widget Wednesday will be June 10th. We had to bump it up. We normally do the second Wednesday, so if you noticed this was earlier, it's because it was. Next month will be a Q&A, just a general Q&A. We are going to, I always say I don't have much to say, and then we end up talking for an hour and sharing, and we always end up with coming away thinking that was really informative. I will give you a teaser. I'm filming right now the next series. The next series is going to be a relaxed Roman shade. I can tell you that because it's on my table right now, and I've filmed the first episode or the first session, first step. I'm really excited about it, and I'm hoping that in 4 weeks' time, that series will publish also on YouTube. So that's where when you get to our channel, you want to subscribe and hit the notification button, and then you'll see when new videos post. I will say that all our education will be up there free of charge. We look at education as supporting the widget kits that we sell. So we are not going to probably ever have a subscription or anything for education. We feel that the education needs to be there, it needs to be freely shared. That's not part of our business model to sell any of it. And we hope that it's helping you elevate your shades, things that you make, gives you a little more confidence. You can see a video, go back to it. Yeah, so we're just going to keep pumping things out. If there's something specific, the next, I will say, the next video series after this, Relaxed Roman, will be the top down, bottom up. Little drum roll for that because I know that a lot of people are asking. We do have a PDF for the top down, bottom up instructions. It just doesn't come with a video series to go along with it, which I think would be very helpful. So that's it. So thank you,
Okie doke.
Nancy. And
One
we're
on
going to
20.
sign off. Yes, keep sending us emails, any questions, comments. Send us your emails. We're always here to respond in between our Widget Wednesday. Thanks for being part of it.
Thank you.